Hello, and welcome to another critical discussion here at the Black Games Archive between myself, Samantha Blackmon, and I'm an associate professor at Purdue University, and the professor of fun, as she insists on being called, at USC, Dr. TreaAndrea Russworm. Tonight we're talking about the 2012 game Assassin's Creed Liberation. So Assassin's Creed Liberation originally came out for the PlayStation Vita on October 30th of 2012. Wow, it is almost its anniversary as we record this. And it was released on the 30th alongside of, interestingly enough, Assassin's Creed 3, which featured the assassin Connor, who was the half Mohawk son of Templar Haytham Kenway, and Aveline de Grandpré, who is the half Black, half French assassin. But I think what's most interesting about the fact that, to me at least, right, about the fact that these two games were released alongside each other is that these were our first BIPOC assassins. And the most interesting thing about them being BIPOC assassins is that they only came to their assassinhood, right, their right to be assassins, through their adjacency to whiteness, right? Because you have Connor, who is half Black, half Mohawk, and you have Aveline, who is half white, half Black. And while Connor is the son of a Templar, Aveline spends her time fighting the Templar, right? Who have kind of come into her space after the French and Indian War, and are kidnapping slaves and vagrants, as they call them, and selling them off, even the vagrants who are not slaves, but selling them off as slaves to the Templar to maintain the status quo. So yeah, that's where we stand with Assassin's Creed Liberation, which we're watching, of course, footage of today. And I think that this is interesting, especially when we start talking about the taxonomy. And I think that this game does some really interesting things when we start talking about kind of some of the details of taxonomy. But I'm not gonna start because Trey, you're talking about that.
Well, and I mean, I'm just gonna relate to this opening footage here that we have, and you're seeing young Aveline kind of run around this area, and I don't want to overlook the sort of emotional side or the psychological side of representation in this case, where your avatar that you're controlling in this opening scene and throughout the game is a Black woman, and she's a little Black girl here, right? So like you're playing her from an earlier moment, and you're able to see like just her subjectivity. You're able to see the game and the world from her viewpoint. And whether she was having a dream, was that a dream sequence, or was that I think
It
it is. It's
it
like a
is right.
flashback of
It's her
some sort.
dreaming. It's her dreaming about the day that she lost her mother. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you have that sort of powerful opportunity to be a woman of color, a young girl, and then a woman of color in this space, which I just want to identify doesn't happen very often in video games. It really, when was the other time that this happened, right? I'm trying to remember because this is 2012 when it
Mm-hmm.
debuts.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to remember when you have had other opportunities to have the central character is a playable Black woman, okay? And or a time when you were able to play as a young Black girl, even for those few moments, right, in a
Mm-hmm.
game as the sole option, right? Um, there might be some smaller indie titles. I can think of a game called Blue Sheep. There are a couple of games. I don't know exactly when they were released, but they're definitely not on the scale of this as a AAA title, right? And as a flagship, kind of famous now franchise, you really don't see this. This is remarkable in that sense. Which is not to say that all the choices and everything that this game makes and all of the aspects of it that register with our taxonomy and why it's in the Black Games Archive, it's not to say that those things are done flawlessly, but I just want to acknowledge that it exists. You are doing this. You are playing as her, and how uncommon that is for the medium as a whole.
So, and you mentioned it, you mentioned like this being like a kind of watershed moment, so to speak. But I think one of the interesting things is, and this is something that we often see, right? When we see BIPOC protagonists in games, especially games that are a part of a larger series of games, it's not unusual to see them released in games that are DLC or games that are released, as in this case, was originally released just for the PlayStation Vita, right? So it's originally just a handheld game. And it because it didn't get originally didn't get an Xbox release, it didn't get a PlayStation release, it was just on the Vita.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Huh?
There was a lot of conversation during that time. Oh, yeah. You're Black in the game, but you're DLC, right? That became this kind of running, commentary that if you're going to be a Black playable character or Black female playable character, because then later, games like Uncharted, there's other games that had DLC that featured
Uncharted Lost Legacy,
featured people of color, women of color, but again, you had to be in the extras, you had to be in the the B-side,
exactly.
So.
Right. I mean, we had, and then also not only with like Lost Legacy, but also with Dishonored 2, Death of the Outsider, that had Billy Lurk as the main character. It was standalone DLC, and both of those games compared to their full release counterparts are super short. Like I believe both of them I finished in less than 10 hours. And
so there's this tradition of companies taking a chance, major studios taking a chance and saying, okay, we hear you with this whole representation, cry, and we're going to do it. We're going to have this there. But in this case, as you pointed out, not only was it DLC, it wasn't even available to play on the PlayStation or Xbox. We had to I think I even bought a PlayStation Vita for this game. I cannot fully remember if I owned it before or not, but I do remember playing it on the Vita. And the thing that we have to acknowledge about it is how wrong it felt on the Vita, because to me, the Assassin's Creed series, always this open world game, it's very expansive and it's very vertical. As you see her climbing here, you jump up on these high towers and you do all this and soar down, right? You get this view of this whole expansive environment. And it was kind of counterintuitive to do it on a small screen. The Vita was a little bit bigger than this, but dang, nowadays phones are so big, I should have pulled out my Vita for this video, but you had to do all of that expansive exploration that you normally would want to do on a bigger monitor. And you had to do that. You were physically limited in your sense of how you can see the world and engage the world by virtue of it being on this handheld device. So, that was always frustrating that, hey, it was not fun to play Assassin's Creed Liberation on the Vita.
It was not, right?
I was excited it existed.
Exactly, right. And it just popped up. So I mean, I was going to mention this as you were talking. It was visually, the visual acuity was very low, right? Because it was on the Vita and it was more than 10 years ago. So it was very kind of grainy, very pixely. This is actually the
remastered,
the HD remaster that did release on full consoles or full-size consoles several years later. And has since, interestingly enough, just I think it was earlier this year, they pulled it from sale on Steam and consoles. You cannot buy this game right now.
Really?
Yeah. You can, if you own it, you can download it, but you cannot buy it right now. So there's a question of whether or not they've just said, okay, the game was just too broken, the game was just, too bad visually that they don't want it out there, or if they are going to do some kind of like full remastered collection, or maybe a remake rather than a remaster, because it's still, the HD remaster was still pretty mechanically iffy at times. But yeah, you can't even buy this game right now.
Wow, I must have already owned it because I own it. Because once it was no longer on the Vita and you could own it on other systems, I know I bought it for one of the PlayStations, and then I must have also owned it on Steam because I did play it on Steam recently. So,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I own it on both Steam and Xbox as well. So, and this is actually I'm actually playing this. This footage was captured on Xbox. So yeah.
yeah. So there are those drawbacks that you get this. It's sort of like mixed bag. It's a step in the right direction for sure. You're able to tell this story. You're able to be this particular type of character, have this subjectivity in this context, right? And basically be a revolutionary, be a slave rebel, and be able to free slaves and do all of these other things, subversive tactics. But again, the marketing and the distribution of the game had a very limited scope. So there
Mm-hmm.
is already a history, as we're explaining, of games with playable Black characters, primary Black characters being undercut in some way in terms of its reach and its marketability, and then its life cycle, right? Because now you can't access and play it in this way. You have all these limitations to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's interesting because I think that that's one of the reasons that kind of initially we wanted to like focus on like Black games for the Black Games Archive anyways, because these things are so fleeting, right? It's like the game's there one moment and then it's gone, right? So if you
Absolutely.
don't already own this at this point, you can't anymore, right?
Yeah.
Unless you go and find like a used copy at like GameStop or whatever. But yeah, so it's interesting the way that this is kind of disappeared from, for lack of a better word, right? Disappeared from the stores, at least
Yeah.
the digital stores. Yeah.
It's ephemeral, right? You have this ephemeral um, aspect to this ephemeral dimension to Black culture and Black history's engagement with the medium.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if you are not able to find these videos in the future, you won't have a firm understanding of what it is. Now, for now, in our present, there's lots of videos of this. We have our own footage that we record, and if you go to YouTube, you'll find videos, but who's to say those things are going to be there in 10 years, in 20 years? It will
Mm-hmm.
be very difficult in general to find older games, but specifically, I think games that star marginalized like characters, they're never going to be a priority in the portfolio of things to preserve. So yeah. Now, so as far as the taxonomy, I think it was really important to have Assassin's Creed Liberation and Mafia 3 as kind of two early feature games for the archive, because they are notable and they are, had a major release, and they were not independent games. And these games, I think, are still, despite their drawbacks, are still really important in our understanding of the history of the medium.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of the taxonomy, if we'll recall, there are a number of ways that we try to categorize and track and, note Black innovation, participation, and Black cultures, engagement, and intersections with the medium. So our taxonomy notes things like, are there Black playable characters? So in this case, yes, you have Black playable character.
Mm-hmm.
I think you only play as Aveline and you play
Mm-hmm.
as her different personas, which we'll talk about in a second. And then, are there Black NPCs? Yes, there are in the game, right? In this
Mm-hmm.
part of Louisiana, fictional Louisiana, I think it's 1700s, 1760s, 1770s, right? You are you're seeing lots of other characters who are Black or mixed race in this space, including Aveline herself. And then we have Black cultural traditions. There are some rich cultural traditions regionally that I think are specific to this game and to what it would be like growing up in Louisiana, that you can talk about. The Creole ancestry, for example, and influences, different like religious and spiritual practices. A lot of that is right at the surface of this game. So there's that category. There are narrative themes. You cannot go wrong when you have slavery as far as a narrative theme that relates to the Black experience. Yes, you can go wrong actually when you have a slave narrative. However, that's one of the sort of default ways that other mediums, like film and television, we have a long history of written accounts of slave narratives and slave perspectives. So games are entering that space of the like slave narrative kind of genre. And so in terms of narrative themes, you have that, but you have other things too, like you have rebellion, you have resistance, you have other things that are going to be related to that scene. And then we have politics, ideology, and history, which kind of doubles down because some of those things might be come up narratively, but we have that as a separate category as well, because we want to sort of get at the ideological investments and heft of the game. Then you have voice acting and motion capture. Are these characters voice acted by people of color, by Black people, for example, and both in the playable character and in the non-playable characters? And then we have mechanics and intersectionality. So those are all of the things in the taxonomy that are related to this game. And we're going to now, for the remainder of the conversation, try to talk about some of them. But in terms of just volume, right, I think there are 13 designations, 13 aspects of the taxonomy.
Right.
And both Assassin's Creed Liberation and Mafia 3 happen to have almost all of them, right? I can't, I think maybe Assassin's Creed, did Mafia 3 have all of them? It might have, right? It had
I want to say Mafia 3 might have had all of them when we talked about it last time.
Well, and there might have been things like the fan community. So it's like, does it have the things that are not on here, or does it have like a large sort of Black fandom or modding community? Things like that might not have applied, and we don't have that here for this one.
Right.
But we always intend this taxonomy to be a conversation, right? And to be, if there are things that we're missing here, nuances that we're not getting, or things we don't know about, we want you to submit to the feedback link and let us know. Let us know more perspective on this. But this is quite a bit here, in terms of coverage with the taxonomy.
So I think it's interesting, and as you said, to talk about these different items in the taxonomy. And one of the things that is one of the first things that I always look at when I'm looking at or playing a game is to look at the voice actors, right? And while just kind of looking at like the cast of the game itself, a lot of the NPCs who are Black and have larger parts were voiced by Black voice actors. But oddly enough, Aveline herself was not, which for me was pretty surprising. Right, it was pretty surprising that they had, while they did make the choice to specifically voice some of the NPCs with larger roles, they actually voiced them with Black voice actors. The main character, who is a Black woman, is not, and that was a strange choice.
Aveline. And the thing is, I will admit that it is a tricky process as a researcher, to figure out who's Black in this, right? Is this person identify as Black? Sometimes you can't. You're looking at a headshot, you're looking at a photo, a press photo that someone has online. You do a little bit of looking into their, body of work, and you're trying to figure it out. How do they identify but we always have to realize they're the optics of race, and that there's a certain level of discernment or judgment that goes into that process, which can be very icky and problematic. But you also can sometimes get a sense of, does this person seem to identify, do they have passing privilege, or, skin
Right.
tone privilege? Do they look black? Would they pass as black? Avalon would, right? If Avalon was living in America right now or any other time here, right? She's mixed race, but like Lincoln Clay, she is red in her context. Also in the South, the fictional Louisiana, the Mafia 3.
Hmm.
But in this context, the reason one of her personas is a slave is because she's red as black.
Right.
Her father is white, mother is not. She is red as black. She's perceived and recognized as black. Now, at the voice acting level, we would say the same thing. Is this person is in this context or in our context? How would they reside in the world? Would they be living as a black person or recognized as a black person? And in the case of the voice actress, it does not seem that way at all.
And
And
especially interestingly enough, because you were talking about being in Louisiana, especially we're talking about 18th century Louisiana, like during a time of quadroon and octoroon balls and miscegenation laws, right? That one drop rule still very much applies, and like even if you are an octoroon, like one eighth
Mhm.
black, you are still considered black, just black with a higher value because of the practices of sexual servitude, right? So it is even more complex and historically relevant when thinking about being mixed race in this space, as especially as a woman, right?
Right,
uh
right,
yeah.
right. So it is important to us. I think it's important in general. And when you get into these discussions of like digital blackface, for example, that is because you have one level of representation, racial representation visually, and
Mhm.
then you don't have that same level of representation in the voice acting and the motion capture at the level of performance of who is employed to be in this space and be a part of this project in this way.
Mhm.
And it does make a difference and it does matter. And so we acknowledge that this case is it is what it is. It's challenging for that reason.
Mhm.
um doesn't negate its situation, doesn't negate how it's situated here on the archive, doesn't negate the fact that there are really many different dynamics of this game that are interesting. Like for just now in the scene that preceded this, Aveline is a slave and she's going and she is interrupting like the slave trade. She's interrupting and saving, a person who's in that context, interfering. And you definitely are playing with the different types of power dynamics,
Mhm.
that you normally don't have at your disposal, where you ask, where are these power fantasies, you know, you masquerading in one subject to the sort of lowest of the low in this, human economy is going to be the black woman slave, on top of that. And so to wield that kind of power, because you have class privilege, because your reality is that you have race and class privilege, because of who she is, and then she's an assassin. She has that physical, she has all these other tools that go along with that. And so to be able to have that and leverage that from the bottom of the hierarchy as a black slave woman, again, is both interesting and powerful, and I think something to be played with and to kind of be thought about more.
So I will, and that's a very interesting point, right? Is that there are lots of the issues of power, like of different kinds of power, right?
Hmm.
In terms of like in terms of and money and privilege and all of these other things. But something that you will see when she is, because like we said, she has three personas: the slave persona, the persona of the lady, and then the persona of the assassin. And all three persona can do different things. Um, the persona of the lady can't fight, can't run,
She's right
can't.
here walking slow.
She
She's
walking
walking
slow.
slow, so I
This
hated
this the
being the
fast
lady.
walk. This is the fast walk. And and so because
The
it's
lady
been
does
about
not
a
run.
huh?
A lady does not run or fight. You shouldn't
No,
even
she
give
does not.
away her
She does not.
identity if she's physical.
But what she does do And this would be
And
perhaps
here
very different.
we're seeing her go into those changing rooms, those changing stations where you can play around with her look to suit a
Mm-hmm.
certain mission.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So what's interesting is that, and what I think is different from the way that white ladies, and women who are placed on this pedestal of white womanhood, is that as you walk past guards, you will see little empty hearts above their heads. And to think about things like sexual servitude, she
Yes.
is actually called upon to use her sexuality um to uh to satisfy certain missions. You'll probably see it when she walks past. There it is. It pops up right here on the right, right? Is that she can charm white men,
Mm-hmm.
or non-black men. Not all of them are white. Uh but she can charm non-black men um into kind of allowing her into spaces where she should not be allowed, right? With the promise, with that kind of unspoken promise of sex, which
Mm-hmm.
is really interesting, right? Because there she's very much playing again on that history of sexual servitude and the history of kind of the exoticization
Mm-hmm.
and sexualization
Yes.
of black women.
Exactly, exploiting that, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so it's like, where do you, how do you read that? Because now here it is a mechanic, it is a
Mm-hmm.
superpower in the game world. That sexual, servitude is a superpower. I always thought that the things that the lady could do, uh, felt really slimy, right? It
Yeah,
always
a
felt,
hundred percent.
it feels not, this is not cool. Like you are, and it's like, because the question is like, how critical is the game? How self-conscious is the game
Mm-hmm.
that these are really screwed up tools of the trade, right? That you're
Mm-hmm.
using as a mechanic. And I mean, I think there's some awareness of it because of how codified those different personalities are, those personas are, that
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, as a slave, you know, you can do this and that. And like, I think as the slave, you're not supposed to run and climb and do things because the slave can't persona is not supposed to be too rambunctious. Like she can run and move faster and do things, and she can fight. Importantly, as we saw in the other, scene,
Mm-hmm.
but she'll raise alarm if the slave persona is moving through the spaces because she's wanted. Her, that there are these wanted posters and stuff, and you're like taking these down. Oh, the slave persona will draw too much attention if she's
Mm-hmm.
doing certain things. So I do think there is some self-consciousness around it. And obviously, as the assassin, you have an even freer movement. You're more free to move. You can climb things and soar around, like behave like more like the other assassins in the franchise's history.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but still, I'm not sure how critical it is of, you have to like I mean, I think she does do this. I think there are times when you can call over, you flirt, because flirt is the primary, mechanism, the primary mechanic for the lady.
Mm-hmm.
And then she can like stab someone in the neck. Like she flirts with them and then leads them over to, because there's an area early in the game where you can flirt and you lead this, he's like a guard, you lead him away from where he is. And he's like, oh, he's thinking that you're inviting him over for sex behind this shed, behind this rubble
Mm-hmm.
and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're like stabbing him in the neck. So I mean, I do think there is some um there's some critique of that where she's not like she is, it's obviously a performance. That's the thing. It's like I'm performing as this in this role, and this is what would have been expected, and this is how the Black female body was perceived and resided and exploited in this context.
Mm-hmm.
And then there is a little bit of a flip on that when you can, you're spy still, so you are doing this. So I think even though it feels horrible, and this is an interesting position to be in as a player, right? It feels gross to be playing in this way, that there is still a little bit of the criticality there that prevents it from just being like, no, this is your role. This is your place and this is your role.
And again, see, as she has walked past all of these black NPCs, none of them would serve her purpose. But again, she's not able to charm any of them,
Right.
right? It is
Right.
only the non-black male characters that she's able to charm. And she does use that charm, again, like you say, to kind of lead people away. I don't know that I've ever, I don't know, we have to look, but I know she leads people away in order to like get through openings in gates or go through doors, etc., that are being guarded, right? So she kind of leads them away, and they have these full hearts above their head, and they're like hoo hoo hoo, okay. And which is super problematic in some very real ways, right? Because to you're being asked to play upon a history of, again, like we said, sexual servitude in order to
Sexual
in order to
violence.
achieve a purpose. And it is the opposite of, and this is where I was watching this again and just totally missed the stairs just because I was doing something else. And but you kind of uh but you it's the complete opposite of putting white women on a pedestal of purity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that you are focusing on something totally different, right? And her powers are both sex and money,
Right.
right? She can either
Right.
bribe people or charm them. There is no in between
Right.
as
Like
the
here.
lady.
You got the attempt to bribe. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, the biggest, like the biggest conceit here, in the game are those mechanics. That's sort of the biggest thing that they did, was split off these personas, which, you know, very unique to this particular title.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly, right, because when you're playing most of the other Assassin's Creed games, you're the assassin all the time, right?
Yep.
There and not only are there not two personas, but there are three in this game that have very kind of specific purposes and specific abilities that the other counterparts don't have. Um
Which I replay on Du Bois's Double Consciousness. It's just
mhm,
that here, the third dimension, is the assassin. That's the wild card. That's like, oh, you're black, and you're African and then American, the double consciousness, the dualities that come with that.
mhm,
The third avenue here, the third dimension, is the fact that you can be this rogue, renegade assassin. And you're not totally renegade, because the assassins have, there's a story here. There's a narrative around the Templars, and,
mhm,
what you're trying to do to either help advance or thwart, usually, the kind of corruption there. So there is a whole thing that you're not just like a straight up revolutionary. Like, I got my own ambition. You can't really play this game the way you might role play in like an open world, like GTA sandbox type game of like, no, my assassin was doing some other stuff. Okay. I didn't care about the Templars right now. Like, that wasn't my goal, right? You can't, it is a renegade sort of kind of subversive position, but it doesn't go all the way. It doesn't go that far. And
and
you're not
what's
able to co-opt it as a game, as a player, and
right.
metagame the context and come up with your own aspirations, which would be great, right? To say, look, I have my own objectives. I don't care about this religious war,
Mm-hmm. And that's interesting. What is most interesting about both Avalon and Connor is that in many ways they're not fully assassins, right? They're not
Mm-hmm.
fully kind of integrated into the assassins network. Um because
True.
because as I said before, Connor is the son of a Templar, but he's still kind of skirting the issues because he is still Mohawk, and we see his connection to his kind of indigenous heritage, even in some of his actions in Assassin's Creed 3.
Yeah.
And here, when we're talking about Avalon, she is the Templar, if I remember correctly, and I think I do, is I say, and I think I do, and she is that the Templar are actually kind of part of this network that are um, working to maintain. The governor even says it at a point. We I don't know if we'll get that far in this footage, but to keep the province, and he kind of pauses and says French instead of white.
Yeah.
He's like, to keep the province French.
Yes.
But they are specifically kidnapping. They are specifically kidnapping Black folks, and so she's fighting against that.
Yes.
And it is because of her heritage again that this is kind of a role that she takes, and because we see even at the beginning that her mother has been kidnapped, right? She's out as a child and her mother disappears, right? And it's never seen again. So there is that implication that this may have been a network that was going on for a long time, and even though she was not enslaved, we don't know her like actual status, but she's walking around as a free woman with a Black child in a relationship with a white man.
Right.
Even though she wasn't enslaved, she was kidnapped and perhaps re-enslaved or enslaved if she had never been enslaved. We don't know her mother's full history. Um, and so that's pretty interesting, right? Is that they are never fully integrated into that
Right.
network.
And there was actually a trilogy of these games where you had these BIPOC like protagonists, because you had the regular Assassin's Creed, you had this one, Liberation, and you have Freedom Cry,
Mm-hmm.
which was the Haitian Revolution, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you had and they were all released within a year or two of each other. So
Mm-hmm.
I think
Mm-hmm.
that there was a boom, boom, boom. They all came out. And I don't think we've seen anything like that since, right? Like that was the moment. That was the moment where you had that level of representation, and I think all three of those main characters were marginal compared to the mainstay of the assassins, which again have a variety of like different backgrounds, like ethnically and racially in general for the series, but
Yeah.
very few were coded as like Native American, Indigenous, or Black.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting when you see them acting as kind of revolutionaries, in some ways, right? And revolutionaries in some way. If I don't know, I see these things. I need to go back and replay all these games again. And I'm trying to remember with Freedom Cry. Oh gosh, it started with an A. What was his first name? Um, our protagonist in Freedom Cry, I don't think
Mm-hmm.
was actually seen as being an assassin, but more fighting on the side of assassins, which is even more interesting, right? Because he does not have that adjacency to whiteness,
Right.
and that Aveline and Connor do. And that I think is even, like I said, more interesting because absent that adjacency to whiteness, they don't have any uh kind of in with the assassins, at least at this point. It's interesting because later with things like Assassin's Creed Origins, and more recently with Mirage, is that we get assassins of color who are not seen as being not having that same adjacency to whiteness, but being assassins,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So she's just walking through here, just charming everybody to make her way through without getting murdered.
And it's so slimy and suspect the way the guards follow you, right? Like they are, she's not supposed to be over there, but so she's using her charms, but they are suspicious of her, so they're walking behind you, and the NPCs are in between the camera and her, your avatar. So there's a big of enough of a gap that they can be right behind her.
Mm-hmm.
And, again, it evokes all of that predatory history, these predatory histories of sexual violence, that there is a real like physical threat here for
Mm-hmm.
her.
Mhm.
Yeah, which so in terms of, the other ways that, this game I think stands out as significant, I think it's interesting that it has stayed around for a while, because I was quite surprised that it was even remastered at all. Like, I really thought once it got off the Vita and it got onto the other systems that of that era, which I think were the PlayStation 3, the 3, and like the Xbox 360, and so once it got off the Vita and went to there, I thought that was it. And then it did have another sort of last stand, right, on these other systems before it was
Mhm.
pulled. But I'm surprised that it even had that kind of longevity, because the reception of this game has never been particularly strong. It was never well received, in large amounts from the sort of mainstream gaming public. And I think even critically, people were intrigued that it existed, but it was still never really hailed as anything.
And what we're watching right now is kind of the reason. Is that how fiddly the controls were on the Vita, and
Hmm.
how fiddly they are even on
Right.
the HD remaster, right? I had to approach those crates like 11 times
Hmm.
before I could actually investigate them, because it just wouldn't kind of pick up. And sometimes I was like, well, maybe it's because that guard is over there. But even in the moments when it was just like me and the black NPC who was not facing me, it still would not trigger. So it was very fiddly, and that was one of the reasons I think that it was not as it didn't receive the same critical acclaim, is because mechanically it was kind of iffy.
Hmm. Hmm.
Mechanically it was kind of iffy, and
Right.
that I would argue is not unusual um for games that uh initially, like especially in like DLC or games that have black protagonists, like in this time and even now, it sometimes feels like, okay, we're gonna try and see if people will buy this game that has this black protagonist, but we're not gonna put too much money in it because we don't want to waste our money, right?
Hmm.
So it's like, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Did the game fail because it had a black protagonist, or did the game fail because it had a black protagonist and it was broken, right? um which
You
is
never know, because all these black games are broken, right? This is the legend.
mhm,
This is the legacy of the black video game that my new work argues that all video games are broken, but black games are especially broken.
mhm,
And part of it is because of limited resources that are put aside to handle things like this, like make a more smoother, transition, and so that these controls are tighter and that
mhm,
it actually feels fluid. Because that's the other thing about the franchise, is that you're supposed to have this like free mobility, like you are soaring, you're jumping off the highest of high buildings, right? You have free mobility, free range of movement in the Assassin's Creed games.
mhm,
And so to have a clunky experience, I mean, we have moments like this when you're the lady and you have no free movement, or when you're the slave persona, you're already cutting it in thirds, in
mhm,
terms of what she has available to her. And then technically, mechanically, you have the legacy of the broken game as well,
mhm,
the broken features.
mhm,
And so really the deck is sort of stacked against these games. It's like, you know, you have the black playable characters, which always has a cultural black backlash, even when there is an avid, progressive community that wants these games. Usually there's a backlash. And then you also have the technical limitations and challenges and limited resources that ensure that the game is not going to be, great. Unless you're GTA. GTA Grand Theft Auto series tends to be the one where you can make those gambles, like Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, or,
mhm,
the later one, Grand Theft Auto 5. You do play as black character, but that franchise seems to be able to weather it because it also exploits the image of black criminality as its sort of main conceit.
mhm. And one of the things I think is really interesting, because we keep going back to talking about Mafia 3, maybe because that was our feature game last quarter, but also because here we're talking about another IP that is bringing in a Black protagonist, where generally the protagonists in that series have not been Black, right? So we're talking about the Mafia series, where your protagonists are historically white, and then we bring in Lincoln Clay, who has again some adjacency to whiteness, because the priest tells us at the very beginning of the game that it was speculated that his mother was Dominican and his father was white, and probably and probably Italian, but that's not important. It is. It's very important, right? Because that suspected heritage is what brings him in, as being kind of suitable, right, for that place in the Mafia series. And we've got the same thing going on with Aveline, and I would also argue also Connor, but we're not talking about Connor right now. But yeah, so I think it's pretty interesting that we have that, right? Because this, especially in Assassin's Creed Liberation in 2012, and then Mafia 3 4 years later in 2016, is we're having that same kind of we're having that same kind of issue where they have to prove their worth, and that worth is proved through bloodline.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead.
No. I was just gonna say it's interesting, like navigating a space as Aveline, because even though she has this persona as Lady, she is still Black, right? And that Blackness always puts her in danger, right? So sometimes she has to kind of go back to that charm thing, but she always puts guards on alert when she tries to enter areas that she's not supposed to enter, and she's treated differently, right? She's pushed, she's knocked to the ground, these kinds of things that we don't see happening to white female NPCs that are navigating that same space. So that treatment because of being read as Black still very much exists. And I think that's one thing for me that this game does well, right? Is that it constantly reminds you that even though she can navigate this space as a lady, it has its limitations.
Of course, yeah. Well, and it's like the lady is it's race and class, so there is intersectionality, here. But in its crudest sense, it's a lot of class. You're getting the class kind of projections into her status as a lady, her like social status. And then on the slave side, with the slave persona, you're getting the race at the front. So I guess it's the order of these aspects of her identity. So with the lady, it's like the class is the first thing, and then it's the gender. And then in the slave, it's the race that's the first thing, as a slave, and then it's the gender. And then the assassin, you never forget, you're never far away from the experience of those other two personas, right? So because like in the other titles, you don't have these multiple personas, some of which dramatically limit your power and agency as an assassin. So even when you're in the freer space of being the assassin in this game, you're never far from those other experiences and the acknowledgement of who she really is, like how she would reside in this world if she wasn't able to just stab someone in the neck here and there, pickpocket, stab someone in the neck, soar off of a building. You are reminded of your social location, by those other personas. And playing them constantly, going back and forth.
And so I was going to say, and interestingly enough, because we're in the slave persona again, is that she, in order to kind of blend in, she does different things in different ways. And one of the things that she has to do in order to blend in as a slave is to be working. She can't simply be walking around. So they'll often tell you,
you better look busy. You better look like you're working.
Exactly. They'll tell you,
do too much.
slaves that are carrying crates will alert guards more slowly, right? So you're going to alert the guards anyway because your presence is always suspect. But if you're working, it will take them a little longer to be to become suspicious, which is
yeah. I don't find this game fun. I mean, I don't need to find games fun to find them critically or historically, important. But I have never enjoyed this game like the way I want to, right? I enjoy Mafia 3, but that's because the power fantasies, the revenge fantasies that it lets you have access to are strong. They are pronounced, right? And you can go and do and activate that, and you're always hemmed in here, which again critically is fascinating and interesting and worth thinking about the commentary on that. But from a gameplay standpoint, it's never been like, ooh, let me play some more Assassin's Creed Liberation. Let me go back to it, right, and enjoy it. There isn't that level of personal enjoyment, but I also feel like I'm glad this game existed. I'm glad this game happened, and that someone somewhere convinced someone else or a lot of someone's to make this game, right? I think it's important to have it as a part of the archive, but just as a part of game history, for all its flaws.
And it's like, interestingly enough, like there are so many things that are added for kind of context to try to kind of give you a better idea of like what's going on historically, like in the moment that this game takes place. Like she walks past, we saw earlier, she like walks past slave auctions. We see that, she rescues the slave who's being held, who's been beaten. And when she goes like home to talk to her stepmother talks to her about her reputation. So all of these like interesting ways that we get this, for lack of a better phrase, like this flavor text that adds kind of some not only historical accuracy, but adds to the world building when we're talking about this game in particular, and gives us better insight into how Aveline is being read in her specific guises, right? In her various guises. Yeah. So, and I have to agree 100%. I don't find this game fun either. And I really enjoy Assassin's Creed games.
And
but
it doesn't need to be fun, but it should be. I have liked the other Assassin's Creed games, but I really, from an enjoyment standpoint, it's not available to me here. Why is it not fun to you though? Is it the split? Is it the way the personas limit her, or is it the theme and the historical context? Like, what is the not fun piece of it?
I was super excited about the theme and the historical context, because in grad school, one of the things that I studied was black female slave narratives. That's actually what I did my master's thesis on. Yeah, that's actually what I did not just Harriet Jacobs, but the representation of Black women and Black female slave narratives was what I did my master's thesis on. So this game was super interesting to me. But I think that one of the things that the mechanic that made this game so unpleasant for me was this constant use of one's sexual wiles, shall we say, in order to navigate spaces. It felt overdone. It felt cheap. Not cheap as in inexpensive.
And
but
I mean, look at the image here. We're in the lady outfit, and she got junk in the trunk. I mean, the character module design here is exaggerated. I mean, hey, look, I'm well, I got, I got some proportions but down low. So, in terms of bodies type or whatever, it's not that. It's the animation. It's the animation. It's the positionality of the camera, right? That you're also cast into the gaze that the NPCs are employing all the time when they're looking at her in that like sleazy way.
Mm-hmm.
As a spectator, as a player, you're cast into that role too, just by virtue of this camera, you know, behind swaying and this character module that exacerbates that and is, you know, positioning her to be looked at. And it's not a comfortable feeling. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but as you were saying that, she just was sashaying through, you know, the
Yeah.
area. I'm like, to your point, here we go.
Right. And the other, you'll notice that the other is you walk past female NPCs, they don't walk in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
They don't walk in the same way.
Right. Right. It feels overdone. It feels cheap, is what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. And
Yeah. I don't think there is enough of a revenge power fantasy here for me because all of the stuff that you can do, you know, is within the scope of what you're supposed to do. There is not a way here to be subversive a little bit outside of what is expected,
mm-hmm.
outside of what the story endorses as, oh, go free these people or go investigate this, right? You're very on the nose with the narrative in that sense. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to be on the nose with rebellion. Rebellion's not on the nose. Rebellion is unexpected, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
grassroots. It's let me come up with a strategy. Let me figure out how to get back and get revenge. You don't have as much creativity in being in this space, you know, because I like the mechanics, I like the personas, I like the limitation that you're making me, you know, this character in this franchise have. Okay, but give me something else. Let me also go do my own thing occasionally, or let me solve the problems in ways that are that have more freedom, that have more, you know, of the element of the unexpected. You know, let me make some decisions here. You, in order to, if you're gonna constrain, you also need to have some open options. You need to have more flexibility to make that constrained, hemmed in experience, you know, worth it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel like I have the power as an assassin in this game that I have in other games. And there's no power, there's no pleasures with that power here. It's very limited. You're just like, thank God I can run again. You know, you're not really enjoying being a badass assassin, you know. Never say nothing of being the slave, right? So yeah, I think that that's where it didn't go far enough. But I love that it exists. I love that it was made. It's important, and it's important for developers to hear those type of things, that like, you know, you might not have the critical reception or you know, the commercial success,
Mm-hmm.
but you can still have a title that is really important at the
Yeah.
end of the day for what it tried to do.
And if we're lucky, maybe, you know, the reason that Ubisoft did pull the games from digital storefronts is because they do have a plan to do a remake, right?
Yeah.
Because this is already the HD remaster, so maybe they do have a plan to do a remake, and we'll get to see what that remake looks like. And maybe there'll be new possibilities, right? To put
A
it more
remake
in.
of the same title, like a reimagination of it, or just a better remaster?
No, I mean a remake, like a remake of the
A
same
redoing
title.
the whole thing. Yeah.
And we'll see what that looks like, right? Because
Yeah.
usually when you get a remake, well, sometimes when you get a remake, not only do you get like completely redone graphics, right?
Hmm.
But you also, because like I said, there's also the mechanics can be super fiddly and things don't work exactly as they should. But mechanically get a remake that may even not only fix the broken mechanics, but also will possibly give us new mechanics that allow us to do some of the things that perhaps we want to be able to do, right? Um,
Yeah, yeah. I need a rewriting of this. I need, or give me another chance at it. Give me another a black woman assassin in your franchise. Like, you don't necessarily need to remake this one. Let me have another black assassin,
well, I
in
think that this
Assassin's
one
Creed.
this one needs to not go away, right?
Yeah.
And like I said, with it not being on digital storefronts right now, there it
It's in danger.
frightens me that it will perhaps go away. So I would
Avalon,
like to see it come back.
Aveline, you in danger, girl.
Exactly.
You
You in danger.
I gotta throw in my other cultural references here, Black culture references.
You say
Only
you
good
have
thing
to. It's
That's the only good thing
Whoopi's
Whoopi
voice. It's
Goldberg
Whoopi's
ever
voice.
did. That's the only good thing Whoopi Goldberg has given us. Aveline, you in danger, girl. Yeah, Aveline's in danger of not being accessible,
Hmm.
of not
Hmm.
existing, of being written out of the history of these games.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Well, if you can get your copy of this game somehow, play it and think about it. It does force that. It does force different levels of critique and awareness, even when, again, it's not all done well. And if they did redo it, recast, that's another important thing. Make the right kind of casting decisions that employ and empower people of color to represent
That would be amazing if in that remake they recast the voice actress.
acknowledge that's not the direction we need to go in,
Hmm.
in terms of supporting actors. Yeah. So, all right, well, it kind of I like talking about this game. I always wanted to write an article about it and never got around to it.
Same.
Everybody did. It's on our list, and I feel like as a Black woman scholar, um, it challenges my street cred, right? To like this is the game. There's a few games, I'm not gonna list them all right now, that I wish, because there's so few Black women characters, some
Hmm.
Black playable characters where it's like I should be all over this. This is my job. This is what I was, but I just never got around to it, honestly. And I don't have to like a game to write about a game and to appreciate it.
Hmm.
But this is one that I don't know. We should write this article, Sam.
It was historically and culturally significant enough that it felt like I should have written about it. So I
Mm-hmm.
completely understand.
And I salute those who have, because there are still. We'll link some of the scholarship. Actually, we can update it
Yeah.
for the pay for the entry, because there is good scholarship on this. There are good articles on this game, so people can find it and read about it critically and engage it, and I think that's really important. So we don't have to write everything, but other folks have dived in and done the
100%.
deed.
All right. Well, Trey, this was fun. I enjoyed talking about this game.
Yeah, same. It's a good blast from the past. Going on 11 years. 11
It
years old
is.
now.
So, I think Trey and I have enjoyed talking about this game. We hope that you've enjoyed hearing about this game. And if you can find yourself a copy in your local game shop, or if it finds its way back to digital storefronts, it might be something you want to consider giving a look-see into. All right. Y'all, thanks so much for checking out this critical discussion of Assassin's Creed Liberation by Ubisoft. It was Ubisoft Sofia and Ubisoft Montreal from 2012.